CiNG is easily one of my all-time favorite game developers, and it's a damn shame that they were as short-lived as they were. Whilst they worked on a large variety of games, there's no doubt that their adventure games are easily their most well-known, and for a good reason too. All of them are uniquely distinct from other games in the genre, in ways that to this day make them stand out. As I'm writing this, I've already beaten both Another Code remakes, so I feel like now is a good time to take a look back at CiNG's catalog of wonderful little games. I'd just like to note that this video will be focusing purely on their console and handheld releases. They put out a bunch of small mobile games, but I'm sick of discussing lost media mobile games, so I'll just ignore those for the sake of this video. With that said, let's start from the beginning, with something you really wouldn't expect. That's right, their first game was outsourced work from Tosei to port Contra Alien Wars to the GBA. Now, I like Contra as much as the next guy, but man, I'm really bad at running runs. 2D action might be one of my favorite genres, but that definitely doesn't translate to games where a single mistake gets you killed. So I apologize if the gameplay in the background is, well, shit. As mentioned earlier, Alien Wars CX is a port of the original SNES game with 2 levels from Hardcorps added for flavor. Unfortunately, it's not as good as the original, and generally lacks in content like having dual weapons and bombs be removed. There was an attempt made at adjusting the game for the smaller screen size, but it really didn't work out, making this version of the game artificially more difficult. I'm really no Contra expert, so I won't harp on this too much, as any more would be as hollow as a wiki page reading. So instead, let's just say that CiNG's first release was a bad port of a great game. Thankfully, this wasn't a sign of things to come, as their first original release, at least in my opinion, was proof that these people knew what they were doing. Glass Rose is a lot of firsts for CiNG. It was the company's first adventure game, it was the first of their games to be released in Europe but not America, and it was the first to feature the duo that over time would come to be what is essentially the face of CiNG as a brand. Rika Suzuki as the scenario writer and Taisuke Kanazaki as the character designer. It's also the only game of theirs to ever have been co-developed and published by Capcom. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, so let's talk about the game itself. Glass Rose is a game that is equal parts beautiful and frustrating. I feel like a lot of people either only know of it in passing, be it either due to its rather divisive reception, or because of the cover art by Hiroaki. Since this is an adventure game, the story is clearly the focus, so let's talk about it. The game starts in 2003. The main character is a news reporter by the name of Takeshi Kagetani, who's currently in the middle of writing an article about a mysterious serial murder case from 1929 gone cold that took place in the so-called Cinema Mansion, owned by the wealthy Yoshinodo family, wherein all family members were killed. He and the granddaughter of one of the detectives in charge of the case, a girl named Emmy, go to investigate the remains of the Cinema Mansion, only for them to be sucked into the past to the time of the murders. Emmy essentially becomes a lost spirit, while Takashi gets confused for the family head's illegitimate child, of whom there's no record in the future. From then on, the story plays out in a way that's quite similar to Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. The rich family head, Hyowan Denemon Yoshinodo, writes his last will, and the entire family gathers at his manor to discuss it, and then they're all slowly killed off one by one, with the outsiders trying to figure out who the killer is, with each chapter being focused on a different member of the family. And this is where the gameplay kicks in. Whenever you're not in a conversation, the game functions like most traditional point-and-click adventure games. You move your cursor mashing the X button on every object you hope could be interactable, until you find something that actually is. Occasionally there'll be a puzzle here and there, but they're so few and far between they might as well not exist. There are, however, 2 twists to this. The first is the clock. You have to finish each chapter within an extremely strict time window. There's barely any time for you to be running around freely exploring the mansion, as that's a surefire way to get you to die. And then you have to start the whole chapter over. In theory, this is fine, but the issue stems from the fact that it's oftentimes unclear where you have to go or what you have to do. There's plenty of situations where you'll be running around aimlessly, leading you to run out of time and making you do everything over. What doesn't help is that since everything but the characters themselves is pre-rendered, it makes knowing what you can and can't interact with difficult to tell sometimes. Your only real hints are these visions Takeshi gets when interacting with objects or talking to people, as traveling through time somehow gave him the ability to read minds. It turns into a torturous form of trial and error, only mildly mitigated by the fact that you can save anywhere. Because it really does feel like sometimes the only way to get through the game without wanting to tear your hair out is by using a walkthrough. The other unique thing here is the game's main collectible, the heart fragments. See, when Emmy got turned into a time ghost thingy, her heart was quite literally shattered into pieces that you can collect. These are scattered all over the mansion and only serve one purpose. This game has several endings which are determined by a myriad of factors. One of those is how many heart fragments you've collected. Once again, this is fine in theory, but a mess in execution. There's no way to tell how many fragments you actually have. Collecting them gives you a number, but that's not the amount of fragments you have, it's just the amount of fragments you just collected. Because of this, even if you knew how many fragments you need to get any given ending, you'd still be completely incapable of keeping track of that number unless you painstakingly note down each time you collect some. Pair this with the aforementioned time limit and it leads to essentially just you picking up all the fragments you come across and hoping for the best. Once you get into a conversation, the gameplay changes completely. Where in most adventure games, visual novels and so on give you dialogue choices, Glass Rose instead lets you select words and phrases to further inquire about them. For instance, when at the beginning of the game Dimension's butler calls Takashi Kazuya, the name of Denemon's estranged son, you can mark the name and Kazuya will inquire about it, leading the conversation forwards. And once again, great in theory, but poor execution. Often it's unclear what words or phrases you're meant to select, as characters don't react to everything, but only to specific phrases, and you better make sure to select only what you need. Using the example from earlier, selecting Kazuya gets your reaction, but selecting the space before or after it as well leads to gibberish. It can get infuriating at times, but at least the game is kind enough to let you go back to earlier text boxes, as well as letting you know if there are still some options you haven't gone through in an earlier one. The last thing the game has to offer in terms of gameplay is these weird quicktime events. There's only like 2 or 3 in the entire game, though one of them affects your ending. Instead of making you press a button, you instead have to quickly select one of multiple options. It's a completely pointless mechanic. In spite of all the harping on this game, I still really like it, and there's plenty of reasons to do so. For one, I genuinely love the story. However, this is the reason why the game was so poorly received in Europe. The translation is a mess. Some lines make no sense and others are made infinitely weirder by the vocal performances. In English, Takashi is voiced by Eric Kelso. Most of you probably know him as the funny screaming blonde guy from Hyde. But in this very calm performance, he gives the character a confused air about him, which I actually quite enjoyed. Every character speaks in a stilted and awkward way, as if they weren't really conscious. I actually think that, entirely by accident, this gives the game a very distinct personality and adds to the mysterious and oppressive atmosphere. This feeling that something's just not right is made even stronger with the music. It was composed by Keiichi Okabe, whom I've talked about on this channel before. He's the composer for the older Tekken games and the entire Nier series. The soundtrack is like nothing else he's ever worked on, consisting of a lot of distant and discomforting piano keys. The entire soundtrack has this dreamlike quality to it, growing progressively faster and seemingly out of shift the closer you are to running out of time. It's a kind of atmosphere I can't really say I've seen in another game, the closest comparison I could possibly make being Evergrace of all games. As far-fetched as that may sound, in Japan the dub is a lot more high profile. Takashi is both modeled, mocapped and voiced by Masahiro Matsuoka, a decently famous Japanese actor as well as the drummer for the band Tokyo. They're actually still around. I listened to some of their music for this video and while not my thing, it's definitely far from bad. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the game's aesthetic. It goes for a sort of Resident Evil-esque style of realism, and whilst it can be a bit uncanny, I once again think it fits the game's dreamlike nature quite well. It also serves as a showcase of the fact that CiNG have always been willing to experiment with the aesthetics of their games. Ultimately, I think I've made it pretty clear that Glass Rose is a deeply flawed game, but it's one that I am thoroughly fascinated with. It helps that it's only 5 hours long as well, so if anything I mentioned here interests you, then I highly recommend you to dig out some GameFAQs walkthrough and give the game a shot. I genuinely think there is a lot to appreciate here. Another Code, Two Memories, might not be my favorite CiNG game, but it is what I believe to be their most important one. Not only is it the game that defined the studio's identity, but it would also go on to set the standard for all of their projects going forward. This time the protagonist is a 13-year-old girl named Ashley Mizuki Robbins, who repeatedly dreams about her mother being murdered in front of her. Ever since her parents' disappearance, she's been raised entirely by her aunt Jessica under the belief that both of them had been dead. Lo and behold, her father's been alive all along and sends Ashley a letter containing a DAS, and a request to come visit him on the so-called Blood Edward Island, where he's been conducting research on his own for the past 11 years. On the day before her 13th birthday, she and her aunt go there to meet him, but he never turns up, and Jessica goes missing when she goes look for him, which leads to Ashley looking for them on her own, only to come across and befriend a ghost named Dee, who has lost all of his memories. From then on, the game is about both Ashley and Dee trying to figure out the truth behind their memories, hence the title, as well as finding Jessica and Ashley's dad. It's a simple premise, but that's really all it needs to be. Easily the strongest aspect of Another Code is its writing. Every character, including Ashley, speaks with a sort of quiet nuance. The game never takes away the perspective from Ashley. You see everything through her eyes, and so a lot of the best moments of this game's writing stem from how through Ashley's own observations the player is able to learn a lot about the entire game's cast, who otherwise only have like 3 to 4 unique sprites. It's something that no other game in CiNG's library even attempted, as starting with the next one, most of the characters' emotions and thoughts were expressed through their mannerisms and facial expressions, instead of just their choice words and the main character's interpretation thereof. As while that is most definitely still a thing, it's definitely not the sole focus anymore. The game also has an extremely small cast for an adventure game, with only 6 characters ever showing up throughout the story, 2 of which aren't even in it for most of the game. Most of the time it's just Dee and Ashley on their own, with their friendship as the clear centerpiece. Especially as you can see the two steadily influence each other, with Dee growing more comfortable around Ashley as he remembers his own past, and Ashley herself becoming less shy and afraid as a result of his company. Now, this entire time I've been talking about another code, but see, this game actually had 2 versions. Whilst Europe and Asia got another code, America had trace memory. On the surface, these are the same game, but the script is actually completely different. Whereas another code is a largely faithful translation, trace memory attempts to make the game more realistically written, almost entirely for the worse. Going over all the differences could fill an entire video on its own, with small changes like replacing all instances of the word another with trace, so instead I'll focus on just the biggest change, Ashley herself. She's a lot more outspoken and has kind of a short fuse when compared to her in AC. There's also some minor alterations that result in plot holes and inconsistencies. To some people, all the changes might be minor, but I would still highly encourage playing another code instead of trace memory. With the story and writing out of the way, let's discuss the gameplay a little. Being another adventure game, you once again walk around interacting with objects to solve puzzles. Like in Class Rose, the game takes place almost entirely within a big mansion, though this time there's a much greater focus on the puzzles. Whilst some of them are your standard fare, CiNG loves using their system's hardware in unique and creative ways, like making you take screenshots with the DAS's camera to use on one screen to match something on the other, shutting the DS, or even holding the screens over one another just enough so that the reflections overlap. It's an incredibly unique game thanks to that, though this does unfortunately mean that the only real way to play it is on an actual DS. Unlike Takashi, you also control Ashley directly, with the game taking place from a bird's eye view perspective. It gives the otherwise small map a real sense of scale and helps it stand out from not just the rest of CiNG's library, but other adventure games in general. And then there's the CiNG trademark. Each chapter ends with Ashley reminding herself of what happened in the last one. The game prompts you with a question and you have to select the right answer out of one group. There is no fail state here, and it's not really quizzing you on whether you've been paying attention either. It's a refresher, making sure you're caught up on all the important details. CiNG would go on to use this mechanic in all of their later adventure games, and it's easily one of their most recognizable features, as it ties a story synopsis into the story itself. The game's central theme revolves around memories, and so in order to never forget the important details, Ashley reminds not only herself but the player as well. The game might not be some grand and special story, but its simple nature, paired with its masterful execution, allows this game to be truly timeless. With it only being 3 hours long at that, there's really no reason not to check it out. Its status as a classic is more than well earned. After the moderate success of another code, CiNG decided to make another game for the DS, and so 2 years later the world was blessed with Hotel Dusk Room 215, which once again, just like another code, was directed and art directed as well as largely illustrated by Taisuke Kanazaki, and its scenario was written by Rika Suzuki. If you've taken a look at my channel before, you might have come to realize that I adore this game. I'm not going to be spending too much time talking about it, as I already dedicated an entire video to it, spoiler free of course. It'll be linked in the description, though it's a bit old so the audio quality isn't the best and I would highly suggest watching it at 2x speed. The general overview is that it's beautiful, rotoscoped aesthetic, its wonderfully written characters and its fantastic story make it a must play, not just for the DS, but as an adventure game in general. I'd argue it's one of the best ever made. After it, CiNG would end up taking a year off from working on their original IPs, and so we ended up getting, just like with Contra, I'm completely out of my depth here, truth be told. I've only ever played a single Monster Rancher game before this video, and that was purely because I found the idea of summoning your creatures through different CDs to be really cool. And if I'm being honest, I never beat either of CiNG's Monster Rancher DS games. That's right, there's 2. Only ever the second one was localized, though. It's just not my style of game, and as far as I can tell, 2 is virtually identical to the first, barring some quality of life and story differences. They seem to be about as good as any other Monster Rancher game to me as an outsider, and I had my fun with them. The big summoning gimmick for these games is drawing something to summon your creatures. Then you train them up and improve their stats and make them compete in tournaments and so on. If any diehard Monster Rancher fans would like to correct me in the comments, then please go ahead. These games themselves really don't matter for our purposes. What matters is that, by virtue of CiNG working on not 1 but 2 Monster Rancher games, the company had established some friendly relations with Tecmo, which is something that'll become relevant again later. Another Code R, Journey into Lost Memories, is a Wii sequel to Another Code that was only ever released in Japan and Europe. It takes place 2 years after the original, with Ashley's father inviting her to go on a camping trip at a place named Lake Juliet. It's hard to introduce this game's story without spoiling the first, so I'll just leave it at this. I have a lot of mixed feelings regarding this game. It's by no means bad, but it's a considerable step back from CiNG's last 2 adventure games. For one, the story, while still engaging, feels extremely bloated. I'd assume it's for the sake of padding out runtime to justify being on a console instead of a handheld, but there are several points in the story where you essentially just run a bunch of errands. A good example of this is when the game's protagonist Matt catches a fever. Ashley needs to run around all over the place to try and make him medicine. It doesn't really tie into anything and serves little other than adding to the character interactions, and it just breaks the pacing completely. The game clocks in at around 10 hours, but ends up feeling like little actually happens in any given chapter because of it. What doesn't help is that the writing in this game just goes in circles. I can't name the amount of conversations in this game where the characters just repeat the same thing like 3 or 4 times before finally continuing. Seriously, they say the word lake way too often here. There's also a lot of characters in this game due to its setting, and while most of them do feel significantly fleshed out, others, like Sam, might as well not exist. On the gameplay side of things, a lot has been streamlined from the first game. The game now largely takes place from a side-scrolling view, though large rooms are shown from a locked-in over-the-shoulder perspective. It makes the exploration feel a lot more restricted. Thankfully, the puzzles themselves are still great, creatively utilizing the Wiimote. The most obvious example of this is the TAS, which is a new additional device to the DAS from the first game that now lets you open locked doors. For instance, you might need to input the number 3. The Wiimote doesn't have a 3 button, so instead you press 2, start 1. It seems pretty basic, but they managed to get a lot of mileage out of it, without it all ever feeling superfluous or tacked on. Unfortunately, this too comes with its fair share of problems. ACR loves reusing the same puzzles over and over. The task puzzle I mentioned, while being expanded upon every time, is used like 10 times. There's also another much more irritating example. Later on into the game, you get a water sample testing kit to check whether or not a body of water is polluted. You do this by taking a sample, filling up the exact necessary amount of testing fluid, and then shaking the Wii remote until it's all mixed up. You do this like 4 times, maybe even more if you're unlucky, and it never really varies up. Because of all this, CiNG's longest game also ends up being one of its weakest. Neither great nor bad. I think Nintendo Gamer's review from back in the day sums it up perfectly. Not quite the blistering next step after Hotel Dusk, but CiNG at their worst are still better than most. Gently intriguing stuff. 7 out of 10. Little King's Story is the first and only non-adventure game original project CiNG ever put out, having been co-developed by Town Factory, and while I was originally kind of put off by it, I actually ended up quite liking this game. The game is light on story, and that's fine as the gameplay is clearly the focus. The gist of it is that you play as King Korobo, monarch of the dinky little kingdom of Alpoco. The game largely plays like Pikmin with some city building elements strewn throughout. You can recruit some carefree adults and have them fight for you, dig up treasure, and so on. Bringing back treasure to your throne nets you money, which you can in turn use to expand your kingdom, build more buildings, and other things. You can also build huts that allow your carefree adults to get a job. Knights are focused on combat, farmers can dig stuff up, carpenters can build bridges, and so on. Changing a unit class also costs some money, so there's a clear resource management element here. Each day consists of 2 things. The first is to try and reach the money quota by bringing back enough treasure, and the other is expanding your kingdom. You do this by tracking down and defeating the boss of any given area, after which the entire town throws a celebratory party. And that's really about it. It's simple and that's what makes it work. I also absolutely love the game's aesthetic. Everything looks adorable and the crayon-styled animated sequences are adorable. I think the part that easily caught me off guard the most is the fact that almost the entire soundtrack consists of arranged classical music. It gives the game a very distinct atmosphere. Now, this is actually the only CiNG game to ever have been re-released. It's also the only one to be on PC, having been ported there by the IP holder Marvelous Entertainment. Unfortunately, the PC port is shit, messing with the game's original aesthetic and just generally not running that well. There was also a reimagining/sequel on the Wii, but that one had nothing to do with CiNG, so we're not talking about it. Conclusion: if you like Pikmin and want a cute and relaxing time, then this is the game for you. Just make sure to stick to the Wii original. Don't worry, there are absolutely no motion controls. Again, interactive crime novel is far and away CiNG's least popular game, and I can't say I don't understand why. Having been published by Tecmo only in Japan and America this time, it's also the only CiNG adventure game without Kanazaki and Suzuki at its core. Kanazaki wasn't involved at all, and Suzuki merely supervised the story. Before we continue, let's talk about said story for a bit. The main character is FBI agent Jonathan Weaver, nicknamed Jay, tasked to uncover the truth behind a mysterious serial killing case gone cold from 19 years ago that has started up again, with a confrontation directed at Jay himself. From that point on, the game turns into a sort of buddy cop story starring Jay and his partner Kate. Now I want you to keep in mind that what I'm about to say is coming from a European and is directed at a Japanese video game based on the American intelligence service for the sake of appealing to an American audience. but I really don't think the team at CiNG looked into how the FBI actually investigates stuff. Jay does so much shit that just wouldn't fly, ranging from going to a crime scene alone, to moving evidence, to not documenting anything he finds. The plot is full of nonsensical decision making from characters and contrivances that get the plot where they want it to go, but I don't necessarily think that's all bad either. The game already plays with supernatural elements, as we'll get to later, and is heavily influenced by shows like CSI and Law & Order, which anybody can tell you are far from realistic. It makes the story a lot more entertaining if nothing else, and for an adventure game I'd argue that's much more important than having everything line up with reality. You could also say the same for the characters themselves. Almost everybody acts and feels like a cliche from an American cop show, but I kind of love it, as it ends up being quite charming and cheesy in a kind of way. All of this is made even stronger by the game's aesthetic. Like in Hotel Dusk, the characters are all played by real actors. However, unlike that game, they weren't rotoscoped, but instead used as is, while being given a thick white outline. It makes them resemble a comic book in a way, and I actually really like it. It helps give these characters a lot of personality. It's also cool to know that a lot of these characters are still in business, at least to an extent. Eric Bossack, the actor for Jay for instance, was one of the models and mocappers for Metal Gear Solid 5. I really think this visual style has a lot of potential, and it's a shame that we never really saw anything like it again. The closest I can think of is 428 Shibuya Scramble. However, even there everything is photographed, so it's not really the same kind of comic book-esque aesthetic. Now that we've talked about the story and visuals, let's discuss the gameplay a little. Much like Hotel Dusk, the game is played with the DS tilted on its side, but really that's where the similarities end. Most of the game has you navigating the world through menus, kind of like an Ace Attorney, going from location to location and talking to people relevant to the case. The interesting stuff doesn't come into play until you get to investigate an area for yourself. See, Jay has the ability to see the past, literally. As he investigates, he gets a vision of the exact events that happened in an area a certain amount of time ago. One screen displays the present, the other the past. This is where a majority of the puzzles come into play. While they unfortunately don't really use the DS in any interesting ways past the two screens, these are still far and away the highlight of the game. Overall, while I really enjoyed my time with this game, it really is CiNG's weakest work. Doesn't help that it also sold terribly. The overarching narrative can feel contrived at times, the characters themselves aren't all that intriguing, and the puzzles leave a lot to be desired, but after CiNG at their worst, came what I believe to be CiNG at what is easily their best. Last Window, The Secret of Cape West is one of my all-time favorite games. Once again, I won't be going into it properly as I already made an entire video on it in Hotel Dusk, so if you'd like to hear my thoughts on it, feel free to watch that video. But the conclusion of it is that Last Window takes all the lessons CiNG had learned over the years and refined them into an absolutely masterful experience. Unfortunately though, the game sold terribly. A lack of an American release paired with the lack of proper marketing on Nintendo's behalf meant that it never really had a chance to do as well as it deserved. And so on March 1st, 2010, CiNG filed for bankruptcy. Some of its 29-member staff, including Taisuke Kanazaki, went on to work at Arc System Works, while Rika Suzuki went on to go freelance. And for the longest time, this ended up being their last project together. And man, what a way to go out. And thus ends the story of CiNG. They might only have been around for 11 years, but man if they didn't put out some unforgettable games in that time. Eventually, Suzuki and Kanazaki would get together one more time to work on the remix of Another Code and Another Code R, with her as the scenario writer and him as the art director. Having finished the remix already, I have a lot to say about them, but that stuff I'll keep for a video on its own. So until then, have a wonderful morning, day, evening, or night. Cheers!